Okay, so today we are doing something that I am so incredibly excited about. You guys, I have had this plan in the works since June of 2020. So I've been waiting a very long time and we are finally here. Welcome to my very, very first You Choose My TBR. Now, this is something that I have seen done a couple of times on BookTube, and I thought it would be a wonderful way to celebrate my first year. In around about a month's time, I will have been on BookTube for 1 year, and in order to celebrate this, and also to involve you guys a lot more in my videos and in my TBRs, I'm now going to be doing my You Choose My TBR series. So, how does this work? Very good question. Basically, we are going to go back roughly a year or so back in time and check out the books that I was reading back then. We're going to cut back and forth with some clips of past Mr. Francy to current Mr. Francy, and then you guys will have the opportunity to vote on some of those books that I read a year ago for me to reread, and I will be rereading those first lot of books that you choose in January. The reason why we are doing this video today is so that you guys have ample time to vote for the book that you want for me to reread. So every month I will come to you guys a month in advance. We'll do these videos. You can vote. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then I will announce the winners in my next TBR. So in this case, in my January TBR, I will announce the poll results. Let's get right into it. Now, I only read 2 books in January because I started very late. So this is going to mess me up a little bit, and you guys may be too, but for the first TBR, we're going to do January and February. Let's go right into it and go on to Past Mr. Francy. The only 1-star book that I had for this entire season was actually, sadly, the most recent book that I read, The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Now, this is one of the 2 adult fantasy books that I read this season, and it was such a letdown. Up until now, I have reviewed every single book that I've read, whether it was a 2-star, a 3-star, a 4-star, or a 5-star. I've reviewed every single one that I read this year, but I'm not reviewing this one because I was just so let down. Oh my gosh, The Magicians. I don't even own a copy of that book anymore. And how that came to be a part of my TBR is that I was introduced to the adaptation of the book. A friend of mine told me how a show had come out called The Magicians. I did not know it was a book. I fell in love with the show very, very quickly, watched every single episode from start all the way through to the end. I loved that series so much. I didn't know that it originally started off as a book, so when I found that out, I decided to borrow it from my library, and boy am I glad, because it was just horrible. Oh my goodness, I did not like this book. And now, I can only give you, I think, 4 or 5 books to vote on. This book will not be put up for you guys to vote for because I cannot put myself through that torture again. Lev Grossman's just not the author for me. So let's move straight on to the next book. I have 3 2-star books. My first one is Once by Morris Gleitzman. This is my only contemporary so far for this year, and basically this story centers around the protagonist whose name is Felix. Okay, yeah, we're gonna stop me right there because I've become much more succinct with my reviews of books these days compared to what I was back then, so I'll just quickly describe it to you now. Okay, so first of all, I want to explain how that book came on to be on my TBR. A friend of mine's child was going into high school for the first time, their first year there, and as someone who loves to read, I offered to help him out by, finding out what the books were and reading them, and then if he needed any help, I would have had the books read and I would be able to help him. And she was really grateful for that. So the first book was Once by Morris Gleitzman, so that's why I read it. I don't own a copy of Once, because I borrowed it from the library and I'm really glad that I did. So the very quick synopsis is that we are following a boy by the name of Felix, and this is it's actually a middle grade historical fiction. I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was a contemporary, but it's a middle grade historical fiction that revolves around a boy by the name of Felix who is being raised in World War II, or during World War II in Warsaw, Poland. His parents are Jewish, so they drop him off at an orphanage. While in the orphanage, Felix is very highly convinced that his parents are going to come back and pick him up really soon, but it never ends up happening, and one day, filled with fear, he runs away from the orphanage trying to find his parents, and we have a story where We're following what is going on during World War II in Warsaw, Poland through the eyes of a young boy. And it was very hard for me to read because there were things that, and when I say hard, I mean emotionally, because there were things that this boy was seeing through his, the innocence of his eyes that we know to be something different. One example of this was that he's looking into a forest that he's passing, and he's wondering why a single firework has been thrown in the air, because it's not a day to celebrate anything, where we as adults know it was a gunshot. So yeah, that was very tough for me to read. My next 2-star book was the very first book that I read this year, which is The Replacement by Brenna Yovanov, and how far I've come since I've read this book. This book centers around Mackie, whose name is Malcolm, but they call him Mackie. For the first 100 pages, all we really know about Mackie is that he is someone who is allergic to a lot of different things that people experience in everyday life. And that's really all we know. It is a fantasy book, but it just doesn't appear to be for the first 100 pages, so there is a ton of a slog to get through. Yeah, The Replacement. So clearly this is a book that I read very early on in my booktube career, because when it comes to fantasy, I've learnt so much as I've gone throughout the year that I did not know back then that I know now. So yes, it's true what I was saying. This book, to me, when I read it in January, this is actually the first book chronologically that I completed for my booktube year. When I read this in January, I was complaining, thinking it's a fantasy, but there's next to no fantasy in it. It takes 3/4 of the way to get through. How can the main genre of this book be a fantasy? That's when I came to learn about the difference between high fantasy and low fantasy. Sometimes low fantasy that's set in our world has very small fantastical elements. I rated this book really low because I did not know of the concept of low fantasy at the time, but I've said since that I think upon reread I would rate this book higher than I did last time. This book will definitely be up on the poll. I'm excited to read it now and see what I think of it now, so it'll be up there. You can definitely vote for it. The third and final book that I gave 2 stars for this season is The Dead Girls Detective Agency by Susie Cox. I didn't like a lot of the choices that the protagonist made, and I didn't appreciate the fact that there was not a whole lot of fantasy that went on in this book. This book received 2 stars. Yeah, The Dead Girls Detective Agency. So you may have noticed with the past Mr. Francy clip that was a library book here on the bottom. It had the library sticker. I now have my own copy of this book. Even though it was not my favourite book at the time, I've come to learn so many things about books in general that I really do believe upon reread that I would give this a much higher rating. I was a little bit unfair in my review saying that it wasn't an epic adventure. Susie Cox has written a really good book. My only main issue, and I do say it in the clip, I just cut it off quickly, is that Susie Cox references a ton of famous things, like she'll refer to Leonardo DiCaprio, she'll refer to Titanic, she'll refer to a lot of famous actors, singers, movies, TV shows, and I thought that that might have been a copyright issue. Little did I know that it's public domain and you can let that go. So that kind of affected me. But taking that out, I thought this was a wonderful idea for a story. I am an absolute lover of any kind of medium that explores what happens after you die, and especially if you're going on some kind of a journey after you die, that's wonderful. So it is a YA thriller mystery revolving around a girl, Charlotte. Charlotte dies, and so Charlotte dies in chapter 1. That's not a spoiler. She's pushed in front of a train, and she ends up in a place that's very much like Limbo called the Hotel Atessa, where she's approached by a couple of ghosts that are there who tell her the only way that you're going to be able to pass on to wherever you need to go, heaven or hell, is through that door. And they point to a door, but the only way to get through the door is to find your key. The only way to find your key is to solve your murder by determining who killed you and why. I will definitely be happy for you guys to vote for this one. I'll be thrilled to reread it. So Dead Girls Detective Agency, definitely an option. The first book that I gave 3 stars to, which I did like, was Personal Demons by Lisa Desroches. Unlike The Replacement by Brenna Yovanov, which was the first book that I read, this was the second book that I read this season, this year basically, and unlike The Replacement, I would not go back and re-rate this because I still to this day think that 3 stars was absolutely the right rating it should have received. I find that so hilarious what I was saying. I would not want to go back and reread this because 3 stars is absolutely what it should receive. I honestly don't know. I think it could have done better. I had personal subjective issues with this book, and I don't think that's fair. Like, for where I'm at now, I can look back and say, yeah, I was a bit mean with this book. I gave it 3 stars. That's still, it's an average rating, but it deserved more. And to hear me say, I don't want to reread this because I feel 3 stars is absolutely the right rating, I don't know if I agree with that many months now, like nearly a year later. Personal Demons by Lisa Desrochers. This is not the first book that I read for my YouTube career, but it is the first book that I picked up, and it's also the first book that I buddy read. I buddy read this with a friend, and we just took our time to get through the buddy read, which is why I picked up this book first, but I completed this book first. So this book follows this girl on the cover, Franny Kavanagh, who is a human, and she is destined to tip the scales of a pending war that's coming up between heaven and hell. So God sends down a representative, hell sends up a representative to try and tag her for their side. A term I did not know is dual perspective, and that's what this is. We follow the perspective of Franny Kavanagh, the human, and Luke, the demon. One thing that disappointed me about this book is we don't get the perspective of Gabe, the angel. We are hanging around with Gabe at certain points, but we don't get his perspective. I came off this book thinking, I don't know if I like it, and now that it's nearly a year later, I have so much nostalgia for this book that not only will I be thrilled for you to vote for this book, but I'm actually planning on reading the sequel in January. So if you vote for Personal Demons, what I will do is I will read Personal Demons before Original Sin. And that way it will flow more nicely. So this is definitely one you can vote for. My second 3-star book for this season is Vampire Academy, the very first volume in the Vampire Academy series. This is an amazing book. There were some things that occurred along the way that I really did not appreciate, and that's why I did downgrade it to 3 stars, but it was still a very pleasurable experience nonetheless. So I didn't hate this book, I wasn't obsessed with this book, but I did quite like this book. I'm very surprised that I didn't give a description of this book, a premise of this book back then, because my February wrap-up was so long because my descriptions were very long, but I didn't really give a description of this book, so I will now. It revolves around Rose Hathaway, who is a dumpier. So a dumpier in this world, in a world of vampires, she goes to a school known as Vampire Academy. A dumpier is a half vampire, half mortal, which means that one of her parents is vampire, one of them was a mortal, and the role of dumpiers while they are at school is to train to become guardians to protect the Moroi, who are the royal versions of vampires, of which there are many, many, many royal versions of vampire. Purebloods, if you're a Harry Potter fan, pureblood vampires. There are many of them. Rose has a best friend whose name is Vasilisa, or Lisa, she calls her Dragomir, who is a Moroi, and Rose intends to be Lissa's guardian when she graduates, so everything that she does it for Lissa, and we learn some interesting things along the way. Definitely it's an option. My only 4-star book for this season was Helen Keller's Teacher by Margaret Davidson. No, I'm not even allowing you to vote for this book. So this is a book that I received from a friend. I definitely rated this book too high. This is not a book I intend on rereading. I'm glad I read it. I found it really interesting. I really appreciate any book that has anything to do with deaf representation. Helen Keller was deaf, blind, and mute, so I appreciate that even more. But deaf representation and culture to me in books is very important, so I did appreciate that. But I don't want to read this book again, so no, I'm sorry, but I'm taking it out of your hands. You're not allowed to vote for this one. This is going back to my friends with a thank you. I'm glad I read it, but I just don't need to reread it. My only 5-star book for this season is Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. Oh my god, I'm just going to hug this book for a moment and try not to get emotional. This book is an amazing book. Generally speaking, when I do reviews on books, I have 1 review video. For Mistborn, I have 3. I definitely was crying at different stages throughout this book. It is just So well done. Yeah, so Mistborn. This is not the edition that I will be reading if you vote for it, but this is the edition that I'll be reading. So I read this book back then. I replaced it with the Tor Publishing version, the American edition, because it's floppy, easier to read, and I actually prefer the cover of this one to the cover of this one. Mistborn, The Final Empire. Do you guys want to know something hilarious? I'm actually rereading this book at the end of December because ever since I read this book in February, I've been so excited to reread it that yeah, it's now on my TBR officially. If you end up voting for this, I might continue on with my reread and read The Well of Ascension. This book follows our protagonist, Vin, who is part of a thieving crew, an all-male thieving crew who are treating her badly. One day she is rescued by a guy by the name of Kelsier, one of my favourite all-time male characters for 2020. He takes her onto his crew, which is again an all-male crew. However, this crew treats her equally. This world is being ruled by the evil guy. It's set in a world where the bad guy won. He's been a tyrant. He's been ruling for thousands of years. Kelsier and his crew want to defeat the evil guy. Can they do it? Well, he's immortal. It's impossible. Right? Find out by reading the book. It was amazing. The magic system revolves around ingesting metals. If you ingest metals for a certain period of time while that metal is in your system, you can burn it and have access to powers if you have access to those powers to begin with. I don't know anyone who's picked up this book who loves fantasy who does not like this book. This book had me falling in love with Brandon Sanderson. As you can clearly see, I've read most of his Cosmere works after reading this one. This is what started for me. So this will definitely be on the poll if there is room for it. And that's everything. That was my the last book that I read in February. So these are the books that I have on me. The ones I don't have on me, which are Once and The Magicians, I won't put on the poll. I'll just make it easier for you and me. I don't have them. We won't include them. If I can only have 4, these 4 will be there. If I can have 5, I will include this one. These are most likely going to be the books that you can vote for my January TBR. Now, if you want to vote on the poll here in this video, all you need to do is future Mr. Francy popping in here just to let you guys know of something that I discovered since filming this video earlier on today. So I have since discovered that YouTube have actually taken down the polling options for their videos, which is very annoying because I've been so looking forward to this, as I've said in the video, and now we don't have that as an option. I did some research and what I discovered is that you can create a Google Docs where you can have people vote over there. I've seen other booktubers doing this before, and so I'm going to do the same thing. So to vote for these books, all you need to do is to go to the description. The link will be there. Click on that link. It'll take you to the place where you can vote, and you'll just vote right over there. Okay, back to wrapping up the You Choose My TBR video right now. I'm also going to be putting a poll up into the Facebook reading group that I am a part of. I want them to have the opportunity to vote as well. So that is Passion for Books. I'll leave that link in the description below if you want to vote over there. And then in my January TBR video, I will announce the winner. But in the meantime, letting you guys go, peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah! Happy reading!